Welcome to the Revenue Room podcast, your go-to resource for uncovering how data powers revenue growth, profitability, and value creation across the information marketing services industries, including media and events. I'm your host, Heather Holst-Knudsen, and today we have an incredible guest joining us, Will Lee, the CEO of Adweek. Will brings over 2 decades of experience transforming iconic media brands. Before taking the helm at Adweek in July 2023, he served as Chief Operating Officer at NPR, where he led the strategy and product transformation of the organization and its network of 249 member stations. Prior to NPR, he was the SVP and head of digital for the entertainment group at Meredith Corporation, where he directed the digital and video businesses of People, Entertainment Weekly, People in Espanol, and People TV, growing their combined audience to over 130 million monthly users with more than 1 billion monthly content views. He also spent nearly 8 years at Time Inc., where as digital editorial director, he led digital content and programming for major brands including People, Entertainment Weekly, Sports Illustrated, InStyle, and Essence. Earlier in his career, he drove record-breaking digital growth as VP of Digital Content and Programming at The Hollywood Reporter. What makes Will's perspective particularly fascinating is his journey from traditional media to public broadcasting and now to Adweek, where he's working to transform this 45-year-old brand from a trade publication into what he calls a business intelligence resource platform for the entire marketing ecosystem. Today, we'll dive into Will's vision for Adweek's future, explore how he's navigating the challenges of AI and emerging technologies, and get his unique insights on where the media and advertising industries are headed. I'll also mention that Will is one of our keynote speakers at Revved Up 2025, which takes place February 25th through the 27th in Sarasota, Florida. I'll share more about how to participate at Revved Up at the end of this podcast. Will, welcome to the Revenue Room.
Thank you, Heather. Really great to be here. Super excited for this conversation. You've had some really fascinating ones, and I'm just very honored to be part of the podcast.
No, I'm super excited to dive into. There's so much going on with what you're doing at Adweek. But before we kick off, I have to thank you for coming on today, since it's been a pretty newsworthy week. I think last Friday and then today, some interesting announcements and some game changers. You want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a very busy news morning for us. As your readers will, your listeners will now know well, the merger of, or rather the acquisition, really, of IPG into Public Group and by Omnicom was just announced this morning. Wall Street Journal broke that news last night, and it is very seismic moment for the industry. You have seen it for so many years, people talking about the consolidation of the holding companies, the agency holding companies, and this is really a very big deal. And then in addition to this being a very big deal, making now Omnicom and IPG will be the largest holding company in the world, the ripple effects for the others, like Publicis, for Dentsu, for Havas, for all the rest of the industry and the marketers that are clients. I think it's going to be a profoundly interesting next 6 to 12 months in the industry. And I can't wait to see what happens at Cannes this June. In addition, so yeah, it's been a very, very full week of news.
So, and actually last week there was some news, unfortunate news. Actually, Condé Nast had some significant layoffs,
Mm-hmm.
and so did Edelman. So, which I don't
Yeah.
know, on the Condé Nast side, it seemed like a lot of senior level positions got hit, including a lot on the events team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Condé is, like many publishers, it is a challenging time to be in publishing, not just because of all of the external forces that are affecting audience, right? So if you're a publisher like Condé, or Vox Media also had some layoffs last week, unfortunately. And, it's really a struggle to capture audience because whether you're a pure play digital publisher like Vox, or you're a traditional magazine publisher that has created a big digital footprint, like Conde, it's still really, really hard to grow audience. And if your audience isn't growing, then it's really hard to see where the revenue comes, particularly if you start to be a subscription driven or a membership driven or a direct to consumer driven business. It's just harder and harder every every month seemingly. And so yeah, and I know some of those people, and it's tremendously sad. But I think in 25, what's interesting to me, and what I'm cautiously excited to see, is how that the media model really changes, and how it becomes what becomes of a lot of this turmoil. And that's one of the things that I think Adweek can help do in the industry, is to, expression I like to use is unmess the mess, because it is a very messy and very complicated time in all of these businesses, whether you're on the agency side, whether you're on the publisher side. And so I think having a source of intelligence and insight to really help inform people, but also help guide some decision making, is really important.
No, and we'll dive into that. And I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, this kind of leads into my first question. You're very uniquely positioned in a way, in a significant way, because on one hand, B2C media very well, having risen up the ranks through B2C media, and not only B2C media, but content and the digital data side. And now you're leading a B2B publication that talks to the B2C side, but I believe also the B2B media side and the brands marketing through them are now as part of your plan to expand the market. But you're right. It is we have to unmess the mess, and um, the complication and the complexity where like decisions are being made really is actually at the CEO level all the way down. It is as pervasive. So all right. Well, you've had a fascinating career arc across major media brands, from entertainment and lifestyle at People and NPR to public broadcasting at NPR and Entertainment Weekly on the People side, on the B2C side. What attracted you to take the helm at Adweek? I mean, go from the B2C realm now moving over to B2B.
Well, so my origin story with Adweek is that I started reading Adweek at the age of 11 back in the 80s in my hometown of Decatur, Illinois. And the very brief explanation there, besides being obviously a slightly strange 11-year-old, was that my mother was who I love dearly, is just a chronically late human being. So when I was 11 and I would do after school activities at the local community college or at a public library, she would just show up like an hour and a half late, and that was before cell phones. So I was just waiting. And I remember that I would go into the periodicals room in the library, and I'd go over to the magazines for a little amusement to kill some time. And Adweek was actually the first publication on the rack because of where it is in the alphabet, right? And so, and it wasn't very old then. I mean, that was in its first kind of 5 years of operation. But I remember that it was a fascinating lens into an industry that I didn't even know existed, right? Really. And if you remember, the early 80s were a time when Wendy's, Coca-Cola, Apple, the big ads were really moments in the cultural zeitgeist, like really important moments. And so it was amazing to me to see through the pages of Adweek that somebody actually made that, right? And it was there, that was a job that you could do. And I think that had always stayed with me. So Adweek has been part of my journey from then until now, just as an observer, but also as a professional. So when the opportunity came up through Shamrock Capital, who's our private equity ownership, I was really fascinated because I've just been a huge fan of the brand for so many years. And I think one of the things that I've been really lucky in my career to have experienced is to be part of a brand that I have cared about deeply, and that I have a real personal investment in. So NPR very much that way. Whereas a chief operating officer, huge public media fan and huge fan of NPR's specifically. People, I grew up, my dad was a physician, and there were always People magazines, right, in the waiting room. So I would just, that was, again, like a lens for a kid from Decatur, Illinois, into sort of the larger world. And so I've just had the chance to be part of those brands and to help bring them, through a time of transformation. And so I think Adweek is at a very specific point in its journey, being 45 years old. But, to be precise about it, it's also about half the age, or less than half the age, of our most direct competitor. And as a result, I feel like we're still the insurgent and we're still the disruptor.
Yeah.
And I think, when I look at the opportunity for Adweek, what I tell the team is that we are very much a startup with a great head start.
That's really interesting. A 45-year-old startup. So, but yeah, you are the baby on the block, so to say. And
Yeah.
so you were at NPR, and from what I read, you led the launch of the NPR network, which was a major product transformation. And now you're looking to transform Adweek, and the transformation is when I first was writing down the notes, I'm like, okay, he wants to take a trade publication and put it as as a platform. And I'm like, wait, I'm missing something here. It's not just platform. He wants to do as a business intelligence platform,
Hmm.
and so that's a pretty significant transformation. What lessons are you going to be able to bring over from NPR over to Adweek as you embark on this business transformation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the NPR network, just to explain to those who might not know, was really a very transformative and pretty disruptive way of doing business, which, to be specific, was a way for um, NPR to drive revenue directly from consumers. That, in the history of NPR and the 250 member stations, had never been the case. Oddly, I think it might be shocking to know that, but NPR literally could not ask a consumer for $1 directly to NPR. It always had to go through the member stations. And NPR has obviously built a very national presence and a very international presence. And so this was something that had been worked on for some time, for several years, but they could never really get it through, and convince the stations that this was a good idea. So to get to your question, I think one of the lessons that I learned, and one of the things that I did to get the NPR network launched, was a lot of listening, a tremendous amount of listening, a tremendous amount of stakeholder engagement, and not just politicking, right? There's a difference. Really trying to be part of the community of station leadership. And frankly, when it came to NPR, it wasn't just the people who ran the 250 member stations that I had to get on side. It was getting everybody from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They had to understand what this was about and support it. And there were just a lot of people that required a tremendous amount of care and feeding, if you will, but also real basic sort of numerical and data backup to get them to understand why this was important. And so, as that relates to Adweek, I think as Adweek, again, it's a pretty essential part of the industry, and it's a brand that a lot of people care about. But for us to be really high impact within the industry, there's a lot of that stakeholder engagement that I think I've spent a lot of my first year as CEO doing, whether it's with the people who run the agencies, whether it's with CMOs, whether it's with the many industry associations, the ANA, the AAF, there's so many different stakeholders in the marketing and advertising world. And oddly, some of them, everybody knows each other. And what I've learned, because I wasn't really part of this world, is that it's really small. But so you have to be pretty careful who you talk to and what you say. But getting the stakeholders to really believe in what we're doing at Adweek is really just a huge part of my role, right? And getting their feedback, getting their very honest feedback. So I think that's really what I would say. I think this notion of like really, really listening, but also engaging the community in a way that is helpful both for them and for my business.
That's, as you're talking through that, it's one of the biggest brick walls, so to say, with business transformation. You could have the best idea, but if culture, you got this culture realignment, and it's
Hmm.
culture not just inside the four walls of your business, it's the entire ecosystem. And I would imagine with NPR, that was a huge undertaking. So
It
so
was.
I can see how you can absolutely translate that over to your current ecosystem, right? Because you are
Yeah.
dealing with, I mean, if you had to talk about your customer segments at Adweek, how would you describe them?
Well, it's interesting. So if you look at it from, there are a couple of different ways to look at it. Obviously, there are just the cohorts of who is in our readership and who engages with the brand, which would be the agencies, the marketers, the tech companies, the advertising technology, ad tech companies, publishers. So that, and those are all pretty disparate, obviously interconnected, but they're pretty disparate groups of people. They're pretty distinct. So
Mhm.
those are sort of the fundamental segments, and those people not only read adweek.com, they watch our video products, they come to our events, and they also sponsor our product as well, right? And so that's a pretty unique flywheel to be part of. I think what I look at it also is I look at it through the product lens, which is to say, I think it's very much about editorial and content. It's about events and convening. It's about peer to peer, which is I think is an important part that a lot of people maybe don't really think about. But bringing people together as a community to really understand, the issues that they're dealing with on a much more intimate basis, because I think that's important, and I know that's something that you are doing really well across your platform. And I think that last part of it is very much about intelligence, right? And providing really data analytics insights to the audience in a way that is very useful to making their job, making them better at their jobs. So across those four vectors or across those four pillars, it's the mix of audience gets a little bit more gets a little more mixed. But I think we have to think of it in both ways, like who is it, and then how are we serving them?
So, though, I mean, I'm obviously taking notes here like crazy, but so one is yes, you do have a very unusual opportunity or customer mix in that some of your actually a good portion of your readers could also be advertisers,
Hmm.
right? So you've got, so it's definitely the Venn diagram of those two groups out, that I call buy side, sell side. But the second part
Hmm.
is you have the needs within the audience in terms of their needs actually are, you've got a lot of differences. You have similarities, but also have a lot of differences in terms of what the value they see in terms of working with you is. So you have a lot. That's a complex ecosystem that you have to manage. Um,
It sure
and
is.
no, I love your pillars too. So editorial content is one. The second one is the events and convening, which you actually differentiate from community, the peer to peer, which is so many media companies get that one wrong. They
Hmm.
think the event is the community. The event is a gathering of one time where a community could possibly. That doesn't mean you have a community though. And then the fourth layer is your intelligence, which is probably going
Hmm.
to be the glue that keeps all of those other three ones, those other three pillars, really succeeding and growing and thriving. Um,
Yeah, exactly. And in some respects, if you think about the third part of it, which is the kind of the peer to peer, you know, the intelligence is very much an outgrowth of what those people are talking about, what they need, and how they can do their jobs better. And it's across a lot of different, a lot of different dimensions. It's not just oh, do you have better intelligence or better data on, the holding companies or financials or whatever it is. There's also this notion of how to work better, right? How to work smarter and what resources we can bring to bear to help people to, I'll just use this example, get the most out of the 3 days that they're in Vegas for CES, right? How do you create intelligence around that part of it that is actually actionable, that we can be helpful with as Adweek through our products? So there's just a lot that I think, and you mentioned my sort of consumer background. One of the things that I'm really excited about being in B2B media is the notion of utility, right? Um, if you're reporting on the latest news about Meghan and Harry, or at People, or much less the things that we would report on at TMZ, it's really ultimately a form of entertainment, right? It's not really information that anybody uses, and we were very explicit about that at People. For instance, we would say that our mission at People is to help help her, because we obviously a very female brand, help her maximize her me time. So that was the utility that we had were very explicit about. But at Adweek, you can really make people smarter, help them do their jobs better, and really drive investment, right? And drive what's happening in markets, and how people are spending money. So I think that's one of the things that I find really important, and I take really seriously as the CEO here.
I used to always call that I ran a brand that was focused
Hmm.
on manufacturing and technology. And I was like, we have to help our readers do their jobs better, faster, with less risk. That is what we have to do.
Yep,
And we have to help them do it every day. Like we have to become a needed, you know, e- you know, platform for them, decision support. And then with that, if we do that well, then we can help our advertisers and sponsors start the conversation early and stay there as they're going through that buying journey. So it's very
absolutely.
very similar thought process. So with that, this leads great, very well into my next question. So your current revenue streams are events, advertising, and subscriptions. Am I missing
Hmm.
anything before I go to the second part?
Nope, nope.
Okay. How do you see that mix evolving over the next 2 to 3 years? And in terms of maybe a shift of percentages, but also are there news streams you're looking at, maybe data being one of those?
Yes, for sure. So I think, to answer the first part of the question, advertising is always going to be a really important part of our mix, because whether you're an ad tech company or you're an agency, or whoever you are, you still need the power of the Adweek audience to tell your story, right? And so that's always going to be a really important part of what we do. Now, I think the evolution for us is very much about the direct to consumer piece of it, right? And again, if we're doing things that help people do their jobs better, help um, help them make decisions about how to spend their company's money, then we should be able to charge for that, right? Because there is a tangible value exchange there, and so we feel like people should be paying for that. And we have a very healthy subscriber base, and we're very and I think they have largely been pretty happy with the product. But I think what you're going to see from Adweek over the next year, certainly, and hopefully into the future, is we'll keep adding products, services, and intelligence that will just be part of everybody's essential habit, effectively, and daily, on a daily basis. I often say I really only want uh, 7 minutes of your day, but I want it to be the first seven in the morning, right? That's very important to me. And so, yeah, so that's sort of the evolution. So I think going from being ad supported to also having a much richer direct to consumer component terms of how the data works, so there are two ways, right? So there's the data that is sort of consumer facing, which we're trying to do much more of, right? We have our data editor, Paul Hebert now, and he is amazing in providing insights for whatever story it is, whether it's a big merger like that just happened, or what's going on with a certain brand. Like, he creates incredible content that is data driven. And on the other side, the data that underlies everything that we know about our consumer, about our partner, can help optimize for an advertiser, can help optimize for a subscriber. And so there's a lot of data that we have collected over the 45 years that we've been in business that is really important to the future of how this brand succeeds. And I think you're going to get to a question about AI, so I'll just tease the fact that data is obviously incredibly important to how we succeed or don't succeed with AI.
No, and we'll definitely get to that because I think there's a lot of opportunity with AI, but a lot of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the recent deals that have been done at the very large media level have created a lot of angst with what I call mid to large or mid to small, but not that at that enterprise level, about how are we evaluating this content and what is the revenue opportunity down the road. Okay, so
Right.
but before I get into that, part of, and I've been talking to a lot of new CEOs lately, and those who are brought in to transform, to be change agents for the business, is building the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's either finding the people that are currently already there that can be elevated up and get on board with your mission, or bringing on new people. And you brought on two critical new hires. One is Drew, who's your CRO,
Mm-hmm.
who I had the pleasure of meeting within a couple of weeks of his joining you, and then Zoe Rudderman as Chief Content Officer.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share uh, one of the things I noticed when talking to new CEOs and these new hires is that there really is a manifesto in terms of the hiring and critical skills, like non-negotiable. It doesn't matter if you were, 20 years at the best competitive organization. If you don't have these skills, you can't jump on this train. Tell me what your hiring manifesto is now.
Yeah, so I think it all starts with really the quality of the human being, right? And I think to build a culture like we are having to build at Adweek, you have to have people who you fundamentally trust, enjoy being with, and believe can manage a team through a very dynamic environment, right? So that's not just your ability to manage, or that's not just how you build a team. It's really your basic level of fortitude. I put it into three buckets. I always say that I need people to be tenacious. I need them to have a sense of timeliness, and also have a real level of taste. And the reason those three are important to me are because on the tenacity side, we exist in an incredibly dynamic and often very difficult environment, right? My last role before NPR, my job before NPR, it was three different companies: Time Inc., Meredith, Dotdash. I worked through five different CEOs. I had five different bosses, and I had four different jobs during those 7 years. I mean, you have to be resilient. You have to be willing to endure the undulations and all of the amplitude and the wavelength of change. So tenacity is really important. I think timeliness is also critical because you have to have a sense of urgency around what we're doing, right? And
Hmm.
that's critical. And I think people who, feel like I often, will in my office have a sign that says, if not now, when, right? Because we have an opportunity, we have a window, but we got to capture it, right? In a very timely way. And then the taste thing is it emanates into a lot of different parts um, of a business, and I think this is often overlooked. But the way that you like the level and the what you and taste extends a lot of different things, but sort of what you're willing to tolerate in terms of how things get done is really important. And I that is really important to me. And Drew and Zoe are great exemplars of that because in large part just because of who they are, but also because of the places they've worked, right? So when you've been the publisher of Wired and the New Yorker, when you've been the general manager of, the largest entertainment media brand in the world at People, you have that level of taste and that level of expectation when it comes to the quality of the product. So that's a really important. Those are, I think, I would say that's the matrix of things that I really look at. And whether it's our chief of staff, our CFO, and a lot of the new hires we've made over the past year, and we've made quite a few. That's really again how I ultimately see them through, and I think we've done really well.
No, you have. I mean, you're building a stellar team. So,
Thank you for saying
and I
so.
really like that those the three T's. And I do think taste is really critical and important alongside the other ones, but it's
Hmm.
often overlooked. But if your brand, uh, if you want to stay here, everything has to have that taste level with how you communicate with customers internally, how you're
Exactly.
presenting information. It's not just what's out on the cover of the magazine or on the website. So
Yeah.
I really like that.
Hmm.
So you're in a very unique position to hear from, and I actually, my original question was brands and agencies, but it's more that you're in a unique position to hear from brands, agency, and media about the challenges that they're having with data and AI. And I'll add in there, I believe it's not just challenges, there's huge opportunity, way
Hmm.
more than again when they were dealing with the threats of search and social, which seemed pretty much threat versus opportunity. I think now there's opportunity in a huge way because of something you mentioned before, which is the depth of the content that's being developed and the expertise, and not just the content, but how that content is being actioned and utilized by your audience to make decisions, which only you really have that insight besides the actual consumer of the content. Um, what themes are emerging from the conversations, both on the positive and the negative side?
Well, I do think just what happened this morning with Omnicom and IPG is, in a sense, a way of creating almost it's almost getting ahead of the disruption that I think it was a Forrester study talked about the the number of jobs that will ultimately come out of the agency world, right? And I think you don't want to be on the back foot, right, with that. And this is not to say that they're going to immediately get rid of media planners and creatives and so forth, but this is a very, very fraught moment, right, for agencies. And what you hear is proactivity is going to be the thing that really gets them through the next, 2 to 4 years when it comes to AI. And it's so interesting to see so much of the blatantly angry reaction to like the Coca-Cola commercial or that Toys R Us AI Sora generated ad, because everybody understands that AI is in its infancy from a creative standpoint, and so the level of sort of misplaced anger. It's not. I don't think people should be getting angry that companies are using AI to create things. I think it's you know really the conversation is, well, how do you optimize these tools? And I think all of the creatives should be working much, much more, really figuring out how to optimize and augment using those tools, as opposed to just putting up a big stop sign saying like, well, we don't do that. um, that said, I think the smart ones will figure it out, and I think there will be others who, I've seen this over and over again, like with digital and print, right? People who just refuse to move on, right, and to figure out how to optimize for the next, essentially for the next phase of how we operate. So I think I do think that you're right, there is a lot of fear, which kind of turns into this strange amount of like angst and anger.
Mhm.
Um, I think, I think the most exciting thing for me when I look at just business generally, and then I think about our business, is what we can do internally, the sort of the plumbing and the optimization of of our operation. Um, and I encourage our team to use generative AI tools as well as often as they possibly can. Not to replace the work that they do, but to just to expand the horizons in terms of what's possible, right? So if you're writing copy for for a promotional campaign and you're just stuck and the words just don't come out, well, this is an interesting tool to help do that. If we're trying to figure out, if we're looking at a big data set and we're trying to figure out, okay, what can we learn about what didn't go well there? Again, the large language models can really help there. And so I think that's a really it's a place where it feels a little bit different than early internet or even sort of early search and social, which is to say that those products were very frictionless, right? You just kind of said, okay, well, everybody's using Google now, or everybody's on Facebook and Twitter, so you just kind of adopt them, and it didn't take a lot to like really engage. There wasn't a huge learning curve, let me put it that way, right? The whole point was that they want to make it easy. I think with the AI tools that are out there, there is a pretty decent learning curve in terms of doing it well, right? And I think that's the thing that will separate the people who are really engaged and who are going to succeed with AI tools, regardless of industry, versus the people who are going to constantly struggle and complain about what they're going to do to the deleterious impact of AI.
Yeah, well, and I think you hit on some really great points there. And I didn't, well, it's the proactivity.
Hmm.
And I think along, proactivity, being agile, and being fast,
Hmm.
continuing pace of change are going to be the ingredients that will to success. But I think the other thing you bring up here is that AI can actually be used to extract non-value added work effort or blockages so that you can accelerate what you're doing and focus on value added work, right? I think that's what it's
Yep.
very good for from an internal standpoint. um, but you mentioned when we're talking about your revenue streams from an external standpoint, it actually can be used in a way to create value for customers with regard to your product set,
Hmm.
which can then in turn lead to amplified customer lifetime value or even new revenues or whatever it may be. What do you have plans for the product side?
Yeah, so we actually just announced last week that we're part of I think the second group of companies that will be publisher partner with Perplexity.
Okay.
And so what that means is that when Adweek driven results appear on Perplexity's search, we will get a cut of the revenue against it, and we'll be able to use the data that we get from how people are interacting with Adweek content through Perplexity as well, right? And I think that will allow us to the latter, not so much the money, because that's not really why we're doing it. Although we hope it becomes a meaningful revenue stream someday. But the really interesting thing is what we learn from having a very large, and pretty prominent language model, kind of as a partner. I think the other thing that I'm really excited about with that partnership is we get access to their tools at the enterprise level, and that will be really helpful. And I'm going to be encouraging our team to get very aggressive about how they use that. Um, but it's I think for Adweek, you've seen other companies use. I'll just talk about one of my competitors today. I saw on the Drum they had an AI driven module of questions about the OmniCom-IPG merger, and I sent it to my team. I said, "This is really smart." Now, would I use the same prompts that they do? Probably not, but that's okay because they're probably testing a lot of stuff out. I think what AI does for us is it allows us to test um, a much greater amount of um, possibilities with the audience in an incredibly short amount of time, right? So you could, if you think about it, Heather, as sort of A/B testing, but writ large in a much, much bigger way that we can try things, through the content side, through the marketing side, and just do it at just an unbelievable rate of speed and scale. That's what's going to really help, I think, change the trajectory of the business in a way that we just couldn't do if it was a human being trying to do that. So in terms of future product, I don't have anything specific, but I do think you'll see the product evolve, like the digital product, adweek.com, our newsletters and so forth, evolve a lot faster because of the way we can use AI.
I didn't realize. I missed that announcement, so my bad. But I have some questions about that, and that is, so there's also some rumbling that Perplexity is going to be launching its own advertising model against
Mhm.
search results. So in essence, you're giving them your content to use to feed those results that come out for users. Then ads will be placed on it. Do you see it at all competitive?
No, I don't. I think it's something that we'll have to monitor, right? Because we don't want to fall into the same issue that we had with Google and, then later with Facebook, where your content is being monetized at a much lower rate than you would be able to monetize it yourself, right? So that's ultimately the calculation that we will have to do. But I think that, at this stage, in terms of where the conjunction of content, AI, and monetization happen, it's so early that
Hmm.
we really want to learn. And I think we've learned that, and in some respects, the perplexities and the opening eyes are learning that they're going to have to be proactive about engaging direct revenue to to the providers at this stage. Now, obviously, the big question is, even just from a purely CPM perspective, right? Like, how does this really net out for us, and are we getting commensurate value? And that's just something that we're going to have to
Yeah.
keep monitoring every single month, really.
Yeah, no, and we're gonna. Well, one is I commend you for actually because you're looking at it as an experiment and you're getting data out of it, which I think is super smart. But we are going to be talking about this a lot at Revved Up, by the way, because
Yep.
I do think, again, there is revenue to be had, and then especially there's the data side. But on the flip side, how do you make sure your content actually is going to become more valuable?
Hmm.
That's the part that people have to understand. Your content is no longer a cost center. Like it for eyeballs for average, like there's something bigger here. And you're right, no one knows yet, but I think there's an inkling of how we need to look at which. So for content teams, this is great news.
Well,
Um,
I'll give you this data point actually. So since OpenAI, or sorry, GPT launched back, in the end of 23, um, our direct traffic has actually increased to adweek.com, right? And I think that's because what's going to change in the habit is that you're going to use Perplexity or ChatGPT for very specific things, but you're really going to want to go to the source directly to get news, information, insight, all that, that you can't. Because, for instance, if we have, I'll just use an example, Peter Naylor, former, head of sales at Netflix, writing about the marketing of guns to children. That's not something you're going to type into a Perplexity bot and say, well, what's the deal with marketing guns to children, right? You're
mhm.
going to have the ability, you can access that through adweek.com, but that's not the thing that's going to get easily scraped onto a chatbot. So I think the behavior is going to change. And once you start to see that, that's when, as you say, the content becomes even more valuable. And the experience of what it's like to consume it on adweek.com is going to have to be much, much, much better.
Yeah, and actually, to your point, even within AI, within your own environment, which we'll also have some people talking about this, is that you're sitting on your own repository of Adweek specific,
Mhm.
like just loads of it, right? So if I'm an Adweek audience member or community member and I needed to say, you know what, I have to go find out what brands like me have done on XYZ over the last blah blah blah, and I'm in this like you could go so deep they would literally be able to use like an agent on your site to go bring all
Yep.
that up and then actually even lead them to, and by the way, here's some advertisers that help with this. Like there's an absolute connection there between what you have, how you can have AI use it, and then how it can actually lead to, again, more value creation for customers on both
Well,
sides.
I mean, I was just talking about this morning, but imagine a world in which we could provide historical context for through an agent or some product to provide a great um, sort of historical perspective on how the holding companies got to where they are today, right? So sure, we can write an article about that, and I think we are, and there's going to be kind of a timeline, all that. But really, the to go back into the 45 years of Adweek archives, you really want like you don't want to have to wait for somebody to write that article. You just want to say like, wait, how did Omnicom become Omnicom? That all that information is very much within our repository and can definitely be LLM'd in a way that could be consumable for our audience. So there's just a lot to be excited about, and I'm really excited to talk about with some of your other members.
So, all right. So we've talked about so much, and we're running up. So I'm trying to get to my, um, I'm going to get to my part about the vision that you have for Adweek
Mhm.
of this transformation. Can you describe what this end vision looks like, this business intelligence platform?
So there are a couple ways of putting it. I think one of the ways that I explain it is this. So I think from an end state or from almost like an ideal state standpoint, I think our audience of CMOs and chief creative officers and agency leads, I would like us to be in a very near future state to be read by 1/3 to 40% CEOs and chief financial officers and chief information officers. Um, and the reason that is because I think marketing and advertising, even though it's a $1.7 trillion industry, I don't think that it is covered in a way or that it's productized in a way that makes people understand that it's more than about TV ads and Facebook ads and traditional marketing, right? It drives so much, and this is coming from someone who spent 20 years in entertainment, right? And people in entertainment think that they do the most important thing culturally ever. But when you think about it, marketing and advertising really drives so much of that product, and it drives so much of what think about the election, right? That was all brand, right? It was all about marketing. And so I think CEOs and CFOs and chief information officers and the rest of the C-suite needs to have this information on a daily basis. And so that's sort of like, if you think about like the the aspiration, that's part of it. But I think from a the way I look at this task is that it's very much about three eyes. As you can tell, I have a weakness for alliteration. And so I look at Adweek's mission as being providing investment grade journalism, so journalism that actually moves money, and then inspiration through community and through peer to peer interaction, and then again, I'll keep saying it, but intelligence that makes people's professional lives better. And so I think if we can get to a point where we've moved beyond being the best place to get industry news to those three eyes, that I think we will have done our job. And there's a long way to go, but I think we're making the doing the things that we need to do to get there.
Yeah, and that is those three eyes are really your competitive mode, because I
Yeah,
think just news alone, as we're seeing on many different levels, is no longer enough, right? It's
yeah,
just too easy to replicate. So just in terms of your growth, and a lot of it sounds like you're doing, or it's organic growth. Are there any plans for any acquisitions? What kinds of, what are you looking for to help with that growth outside of just organic?
yeah. I mean, right now, uh, come back to me in 6 months, 12 months time, and we'll talk more about that. I think right now, the task ahead of us in terms of getting to the things that I just talked about, to getting to that level of execution is
Mhm.
really what consumes me, right? But I do think from a overall sort of landscape perspective, there's so many places that we can be additive. We just have to choose the places that we can play and win ultimately. And that to me is actually about doing fewer things but doing them better, as opposed to doing more things and just taking a bunch of errant shots. But I'm excited for this business because I think that the window, while very defined and not limitless, is very much in front of us now.
No, and that's again very smart. Just get your house in order first, get that new strategy in terms of internal execution and things that going well that way, and then see what could be possible in terms of new additions. So, all right, my last question for you before I do it, just a little quick rapid fire, is
Yeah, sure.
5 years from now, what does success look like for Adweek under your leadership?
Yeah, I think it sort of said it right. I think having a broader presence and remit within the C-suite is really important to me. But I think separately, I do think that the industry over the next 5 years will look so much different than it does today, even more so than the 5 years before this or the 10 years before that. And I think if Adweek is seen as the provocateur, but also practical resource for helping people understand it and really live through it, I think that is something that we will achieve, and hopefully it doesn't take 5 years. But I think by where I see the industry landing, and I don't have any crystal ball here, but I think the amount of disruption that will happen, I think Adweek can be, in some respects, based on some of my former employers. If I think about Deadline Hollywood in the 2006 2000 to 12 timeframe, if I think about the Hollywood Reporter, which are business publications, by the way, I think they had a very important role, and I think that's where I'd like Adweek to be looking back 5 years from now. It's like, well, Adweek really drove the conversation and drove the agenda.
All right, great. Well, I think we have time for just one rapid fire, and then we'll
Okay.
close out. But so you're on a deserted island for 6 months. You have everything to survive: food, water, housing, medical supplies. What else do you bring?
Well, you probably heard this one a lot, but I think I would literally take so many books because I have a 3-year-old son. And the one thing that you do not get to do when you have a 3-year-old, regardless of how well taken care of they are, is read. And so I just, and it's the thing that I miss most, having this job, but also have a small child is reading. And I did, by the way, like your question about the most unusual place you've been to.
All right, cool. Well,
Uh,
answer that one for me. I love that one.
which is I went to 2 years of high school in England, at Eton College, and I always say that there's one place in the UK by the Queen's decree that boys are there, that anyone under the age of 18 can drink legally, and it was the bar at Eton College. And I just remember the first time I stepped foot in there, not just because of the drinking, actually, really not because of that, just because you know, it was so odd for me to be in this world, being a Korean American kid from Central Illinois, that I'll just never forget. Like the being in this building from the I believe from the 16th century. It just always strikes me as being such an odd part of the world to be in.
I love historical anything. So I totally know, like walking into, I think I was in London and they said this was the oldest door or something. I was just like,
Yeah,
it's a
exactly,
door. But I was like, who
exactly.
walked through it? Well, thank you so much, Will. We're really looking forward to having you keynote Revved Up, 20, which is February 25th through the 27th in Sarasota, Florida. Revved Up is focused on fueling enterprise value, utilizing digital data and AI. So Will is going to be able to present a fantastic, not just keynote, but use case. And if you're interested in learning more about how to register, just go to h2klabs.com/revved up with two V's. And with that, thank you so much, Will.
Thanks much, Heather. Take care now.